Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on artificial intelligence and the fight against COVID-19 between challenges and opportunities. Dear colleagues, dear friend, nowadays humanity is witnessing an unprecedented health crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has plagued 215 countries around the globe, claiming the lives of well above 207,000 people and infecting close to 3 million. This pandemic has triggered radical changes in the daily lives of citizens from all social groups and prompted countries to adopt new approaches to meet the requirement of health situation to the determinant of other virtual endeavors. Accordingly, strict measures including lockdowns, border closures, suspension of economic and educational activities have been taken that have given way to new challenges that focus us to review our perception of the future and find ways to emerge from the crisis as more united, just equitable, developed world where the poorest and most vulnerable sectors are supported by more firmly established human approach. The Islamic World Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, (Eisisco), serving as a development beacon for the Islamic world, has not been inactive during the pandemic. Rather, it has taken more active stance based on proactive field action in support of member states, particularly those with high poverty rates and weak healthcare systems, focusing on most vulnerable groups and pursuing a humanitarian, technological, scientific, and culturally appropriate approach. The effort of the organization culminated in a number of achievements in a record time. These achievements include several initiatives and programs, mainly Eisisco Prize for Fighting Coronavirus, a $200,000 prize to reward anyone who discovered an efficient cure or a vaccine against coronavirus. The Comprehensive Humanitarian Coalition to establish mechanism for field intervention to counter the current and future repercussion of the pandemic on the world, achieved through partnership with international organizations, civil society institutions, or private donors. Third, Eisisco Digital Home is a platform with diversified and integrated measures for rapid field support, resilient communication tools, modern technological tools, and products relevant to education, science, and culture. Establishment of lab for manufacturing low-cost sanitizer and disinfectant in the poorest member state, particularly in the African region. Distribution of a set of modern technological tools to contribute to fighting the virus, such as thermal imaging cameras, infrared thermometers, and AI application for use in halting the spread of the virus. The proactive action of Eisisco are epitomized in a series of studies on post-COVID-19 scenarios, the future of the Islamic world, and other strategic studies for building and planning the future henceforth. Artificial intelligence has proven to be a major strategic element in dealing with the current pandemic. Our need for smart technology has surged as technology has been critical to the rapid and efficient intervention employed to contain this pandemic. The Asian experience containing the virus has demonstrated an effectiveness of a new technology and application in contributing to healthcare, preventing spread, and ensuring national security against greater contagion. In this regard, Eisisco will endeavor to support the incorporation and development of AI in member states and other friendly countries, while pursuing an ethical framework that will respect human dignity, individual freedom, and privacy, so that these technologies will contribute to the development of people without compromising the ethical principles. Eisesco's interest in the science and technologies of the future is a choice the organization has made, with deeper awareness of its responsibility toward the next generation and concern for sustainability and their prosperity. Indeed, Eisesco as an organization anticipates a future that will flourish from constructive intellectual non-uniformity. The organization distances itself from political affiliation and the politicization of human emergencies and challenges. Instead, it pays utmost attention to supporting innovation so that the future will grow on creative, intellectual, and collective foundation rather than narrow personal interest in order to ensure wider benefits in the short, medium, and long term. It should be noted that we did not wait until the outbreak of COVID-19 to demonstrate our interest in the preparation for the future. Prior to the crisis, Eisesco has set up its Center for Strategic Foresight and developed a new vision based on proactive intervention to address development issues. Given the great importance of AI occupies in future building, we started the following: universalizing AI application and technologies in member states and other friendly countries, carrying out strategic studies on AI in the Islamic world, establishing Eisesco Center for Artificial Intelligence, scheduling working sessions and cooperation with the AI Civic Forum Foundation. Last, I would like to thank the participating experts in this webinar and our audience. My thank also to AI Civic Forum, the Future Society, University of Montreal, Mila and Algora Labs, and to all who contributed to the achievement of this work under such extraordinary circumstances. I end with a quote by the late President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, where he said, "The Chinese use two brushes. The Chinese use toothbrush to stroke, to write the word crisis. One brush, stroke, stand for danger, the other for opportunities. In a crisis, be aware of the danger, but recognize the opportunity." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your word. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pauline Oiseau. I will be one of the hosts of the conference. Good morning. My name is Pauline Oiseau. I work for Algora Lab as a coordinator. Algora Lab is a research laboratory of the University of Montreal, driven by AI ethics and deliberative practice, directed by Marc-Antoine Dillac. I will now introduce you to our speakers. So we are very grateful to have Irina Rich. She is an associate professor in the Computer Science and Operation Research Department at the University of Montreal and a co-member of MILA, Quebec AI Institute. We have Cyrus Odes. He is the chair of the AI initiative at the Future Society and a former advisor to the Minister of AI of the United Arab Emirates. We have Emad Mostak. He is the founder of Stability AI, Symmetry, and Anana, three projects using applied epistemology and complex adaptive systems to help address global issues. We have also Marc-Antoine Dillac. He is a professor of philosophy at the University of Montreal and initiator of the Montreal Declaration for the Responsible Development of AI. We have Nicolas Maillet. He is the co-founder and president of the Future Society, a non-profit specialized in addressing the global governance of AI. And I will have the pleasure to host the conference with my colleague Sasha Landoka. She's a senior AI policy researcher at the Future Society, conducting research on AI, on civic engagement, AI ethics, and AI inclusion. we won't be, we cannot have Abdel Bidar because he's going through a difficult time due to the COVID-19. So it will be Marc-Antoine who will do the third part of the conference. I will let the word to Sasha Alanoka, who will tell you about the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and hello everyone. Welcome to all of our panelists and also participants. I see on the chat that we have over 200 people joining us today, so this is very impressive. And thank you very much for your interest in today's conference topic. So to follow up on my colleague Pauline Noiseau's introductory remarks, I'm very pleased to introduce to you today's agenda. So in the first part of the conference, we will introduce to you the landscape of AI applications to fight against COVID-19 with our panelists Irina Nash, Cyril Hodes, and Emad Mostaki. Then we will speak about the ethical challenges raised by one of those particular AI applications to fight COVID-19, which is contact tracing applications with Nicolas Miai. And then we will open up to philosophical considerations to what can we really retain from the global pandemic beyond AI with Marc-Antoine Diac. So very happy to introduce the agenda and panelists today. And before starting off, we would also like to ask Kais Hamami, who's a strategic futurist at ISESCO, to tell us a bit more about what is the role of perspective in the current context. So Kais, please, the floor is yours.
Merci Sacha. Justement, c'est une question difficile et très facile de définir un peu cette discipline intellectuelle, à savoir la prospective. La prospective, c'est tout d'abord une anticipation pour éclairer l'action présente à la lumière des futurs possibles et souhaitables. La prospective aussi, elle est née en réaction aux approches classiques. Ce qu'on observe aujourd'hui, hein, les approches classiques qui sont introverties, parcellaires, et qu'il y a une absence totale d'une vision globale d'un phénomène ou du monde étudié. La prospective aussi, c'est une attitude. Et là, on est au cœur de cette crise aujourd'hui, cette attitude. Il y a 4 attitudes. Il y a les gens qui sont passifs, il y a les réactifs, il y a les préactifs et les proactifs. Je pense que la posture mondiale aujourd'hui et comment on est en train de gérer cette crise, c'est à travers cette posture de réactivité. Donc, on a attendu que le feu soit déclaré pour le combattre. La prospective, c'est surtout une démarche. C'est une démarche qui permet de gérer la complexité d'un phénomène étudié ou de l'environnement. Elle permet surtout de faire l'arbitrage entre le court et le moyen terme. Et là, un exemple très important, et c'est notre crainte, c'est cette crainte d'articuler, plutôt pas de crainte, mais comment articuler entre le passé, le présent et le futur, et de ne pas sacrifier le présent au détriment du futur. Donc ça, c'est un problème auquel on est en train de vivre au jour d'aujourd'hui. Une autre possibilité de la prospective d'aujourd'hui, c'est qu'elle permet d'articuler entre le passé, le présent et le futur. Et une des choses les plus importantes de la prospective, c'est comment prendre en considération les enseignements du passé, mais pas calquer le passé dans le futur, parce que le monde change, mais le problème demeure. Donc en fait, il nous incombe, je pense, nous, tous les acteurs, comment il faut cette crise, c'est une opportunité pour nous. C'est pour ça que les crises sont porteuses d'espoir. Donc, comment réinventer un nouveau monde? Et parmi les bienfaits de la prospective, justement, c'est d'identifier ces tendances lourdes à court ou à moyen terme.
Many thanks, Kais. And I see in the chat that there is a series of questions. So just for everyone to be aware, there is automatic translation. You just have to click the button, which is below on interpretation, and select the relevant language. So there is English, French, and Arabic is for Portuguese indicated. So I hope everyone gets a message, and we'll keep on answering as many questions as we can in the chat. And to follow up on Kais, so there is a direct link also with prospective studies and how to anticipate the future, as you mentioned, and also in how to define AI strategies. How do you see this really playing a role, you know, in the future work that ISESCO is going to do with the AI Civic Forum and also to define AI strategies?
Peut-être tout d'abord le lien qui est aussi facile et difficile entre prospective et intelligence artificielle. Et il y a cette fameuse phrase de Michel Godet il dit toujours toute prédiction est une imposture. Donc, on ne peut pas prédire le futur. Il a tout à fait raison. Mais au jour d'aujourd'hui, il s'avère qu'avec l'intelligence artificielle, je pense qu'on sera en mesure d'ici 2 ou 3 ans au moins d'anticiper ce qu'on appelle les crises ou les ruptures stratégiques. D'où l'intérêt entre prospective et intelligence artificielle. Donc, si vous voulez, la prospective et l'intelligence artificielle sont intimement liées. C'est-à-dire la prospective, elle nourrit l'intelligence artificielle, puisque pour les prospectivistes, c'est un outil très important. Et inversement, la prospective, elle est en train, plutôt l'intelligence artificielle, elle est en train de changer la boîte à outils de la prospective. C'est-à-dire, elle est capable d'anticiper quels sont les facteurs de changement. On n'est pas dans la prédiction. Et le fait de mettre en cohérence différents facteurs de changement, on sera en mesure de construire plusieurs scénarios et par conséquent d'anticiper les futurs possibles. Et le rôle d'un État stratège ou d'une organisation stratège comme l'Iesesco, puisqu'elle est en train de jouer le rôle d'une organisation stratège anticipative et clairvoyante, c'est d'amorcer le passage de l'anticipation, c'est-à-dire la prospective, à la planification. Et là, c'est le cœur de l'intelligence artificielle. Et j'ai hâte d'entendre mes collègues pour nous clarifier, pour nous aiguiller et pour nous donner plus d'informations quant à cette question ô combien importante pour nous en stratégie en prospective.
Many thanks, Kees. And yes, I think this was a great introduction to today's topic. There is definitely a feedback loop between AI, anticipating the future, but also designing different scenarios. There is a very global feeling among the population that sometimes our technological trajectory is a linear one, when actually it's up to us to collectively decide what is the direction that we want to take among various scenarios. So there's definitely a very huge importance to perspective studies case. Thank you for this introduction. And so now I would like to pass the first part of this conference with our panelists, Cyrus Hodes, Iman Mostaki, and Irina Risch, with a first question concerning all of the different AI applications that can be used to fight against COVID-19. So we have seen many articles being released upon AI applications. We can range across different topics. There are some AI applications which, for example, can be used to find new vaccines and treatments. There are some others, such as contact tracing applications that Irina will be speaking to us about. Some others also are linking other data, such as banking data, also with surveillance drones going around. And of course, there is a huge part also, and I think public scrutiny towards surveillance tools. So just for the scope of this conference, we unfortunately won't be able to touch on all of the different AI applications. But we will select, oh, I see someone is trying to share their screen. Irina, is this you? No worries. But so just to start, just to scope the conference, we won't be unfortunately able to touch all of the different AI applications, and we will select the ones that we think are the most relevant, but also were maybe already deployed to be able to introduce you to the participants today. And so without further ado, I would like to ask a first question to Cyrus Hodes, who's the head of the AI initiative at the Future Society. And I would like to ask you, Cyrus, if you can tell us a bit more, what is the relevance of AI to fight against the pandemic? Before going into any further application, how is AI relevant today?
Thank you, Sasha, and apologies for the camera. I have trouble turning it on and off. Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you, Iesesco, for putting together this important conference and very timely. To answer your question briefly, Sasha, it's going to be challenging, but I can refer you to the excellent paper that our colleagues and partners at Kayak, which we're going to talk about later, has been publishing, which is called Mapping the Landscape of AI Applications Against COVID-19. So UN Global Pulse, I encourage you to look at it online, but basically we're grouping it in 3 different areas. The first one would be more on the protein and drug discovery related research, and that's everything that you've heard about: protein folding, identifying existing drug that can be repurposed, identifying potential target vaccine, etc. The second part is more on the diagnosis and treatments. AI can support diagnosis for medical imaging. You're aware of that with what we've seen, in the past years in oncology, using AI through X-rays and CT scan to try to identify patterns and try to see where mismatches are. And that's very much what we are, what the AI community is working on, also with the medical community, to improve diagnosis and to better understand virus infectivity and severity. That's a big part of the AI research. The third part, which is equally and probably even more important right now, is on the socio-economic impact of the disease. So it runs from epidemiology and the pure scientific research to the impact on society and modelization on the financial market. So anything that has to do with modelization, forecasting, clustering, the fight against infodemics, which we're going to talk about. This part of AI research is extremely important and is going to gain momentum and is going to come to the front line as we move forward in the fight against COVID.
Many thanks, Cyrus, for drawing this landscape. And indeed, I second that the paper you mentioned is indeed excellent. And there's also a researcher from Mila, if I'm not mistaken, who contributed to it.
That's right.
We'll be more than happy to share it with participants after this webinar. And so among all of the very relevant AI applications that you mentioned, Cyrus, so vaccine, treatments, measuring socioeconomic impact and infodemic, which is more related to the projects that you are leading with Imad Mustaki. Why did you think that building a dynamic knowledge graph, building a collective intelligence platform is one of the best solutions that we can develop today to fight against the pandemic?
Well, that's a very relevant question right now. So that's why we decided to create some Kayak. So Kayak is the collective intelligence and collective and augmented intelligence against COVID-19. So that's an initiative that the Future Society has been working on with UN Global Pulse, when we and with the AI community, when we started working on what is called the Global Data Commons. How can we gather and use data through AI system to solve the SDGs? So that's a very lofty goal, but that's what we've been working with UN partners, with the private sector, with research, academia, etc., for the past year. And this is being translated into Kayak. So this project that is now being co-led by again, TFS and UN Global Pulse. UNESCO has joined us in the fight there, in the leadership there. Stanford University and the human-centered AI center there has been joining us in leading that. The idea is to build a platform that makes sense of the overflow of information that we have right now on Kayak, and especially for multilateral organization, trying to make sense of it and trying to do real-time gap analysis. There was not such a platform doing that. And that's what we're offering there, working together with colleagues that are working on putting together extremely relevant data sets, such as COVID-19, such as GovLab at NYU, etc. The excellent work that Mila is doing. So bringing all this knowledge into a top-down initiative to make sense of it is what Kayak is about. And Imad would be able to talk to you about it a little bit more in depth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cyrus. And it's true. It's important to remember that the sanitary crisis is huge, but there's also a significant social and economical cost, which is yet to be measured. I think that right now we have 22 million people who have registered for unemployment in the United States. Still to be measured what is the impact in other countries around the world. But so it's really important, as much as to measure the number of COVID positive cases around the world and the number of deaths, it's also extremely, extremely important and timely to try and measure what are the secondary and tertiary impacts of the pandemic. And so Imad, I would be very curious, as the co-partner of Kayak, this collective intelligence platform against COVID-19, if you could tell us a bit more about what are the differentiating assets and functionalities of this platform.
Unmute. Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Sasha. So yes, the role of Kayak is to try and provide a top-down entity to bring together all the fantastic bottom-up efforts. So everyone around the world is looking at contact tracing, drug discovery, etc., because We're united against a common enemy of the virus. And the goal is that almost no knowledge or information should be left behind, kind of trying to figure out a platform to allow anyone from anywhere, especially institutions and multilaterals, to access the common knowledge that we have about this virus, and as you said, its secondary and tertiary impacts, because the crises will roll on, and find out for any given area, which are the best initiatives, what is best practice, what are these kind of elements. So the two parts of this are kind of collecting intelligence and then making it accessible, collecting knowledge, as it were, information in context. And then there's an augmented intelligence part, which uses the big data, AI, and other elements. For example, partnership with Amazon to read all the radio stations in the world via Alexa and understand what the common narrative is on COVID-19. And then a collective intelligence component, which is having domain expert teams and local teams to translate knowledge and data back and forth. Because there's a lot of data that will never leave a country, but then there's also a lot of knowledge that will never enter a country. So what we're doing is we're looking at it case by case and theme by theme and building this cross-domain knowledge and data sets access. So everything from economic data to healthcare data to social data kind of aggregated into a data lake and then a common API via a graph network. That allows the information to be put in context and become readily available. To give some example of some of these themes, which touch a lot of different areas, there is contact tracing, which I'm sure will be covered in depth by Irina later on. And you have the policy, technology, social elements, healthcare elements of that. We have serology, so the large-scale antibody testing and when government should be opening up based on that, how effective it is. Another example is the infodemic. You're seeing a lot of fake news being put by bad actors out there, and how we can judge that, access it, and then combat it, best practices for the world. So we hope this will be kind of some of the glue that ties everything together without being coercive, that can be a common good to accelerate our fight and improve our fight as a collective against this enemy. And those are kind of the principles on which we built this.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Imad. So if I understand correctly, you will also be able to measure or evaluate the infodemic and the secondary and tertiary impact according to different regions of the world.
Yes, so that's working with partners such as UN Global Pulse and others who have a huge interest in this, being able to understand what tools we have to combat this and what the emergent properties look like. Because the fake news, as I'm sure many on this call have seen, is becoming increasingly sophisticated. So just as it becomes increasingly sophisticated, we need to coordinate a global response better against it. Otherwise, people will be drinking bleach and all sorts of things.
Unfortunately, yes, do not drink bleach, anyone, please. And the last question, Imad, before we move on to Irina, is what do you think is the relevance of this collective intelligence platform for the region and for ISESCO member states?
So my hope is that as we roll out this platform and hopefully deliver value, we can have teams in ISESCO member countries that collaborate with us to translate the knowledge and information to the local contexts. And that isn't just lingual translation. Every single state has its own context and own approaches. Like many states now are grappling with Ramadan and the kind of lockdowns and how does that adapt to that. It might be that there are certain benefits from Ramadan versus others. We would like to have that local context and information access to contribute to the collective so we can have this data sharing back and forth, which I think is one of the core kind of platforms and pillars of ISESCO that we can hopefully support.
Okay, many thanks, Imad. Very relevant platform. Looking forward to see how it develops. And Pauline, please, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Sasha. So I have a question to Irina. Irina, as a proactive researcher in the fight against COVID-19 at MILA, can you tell us more about the applications MILA is currently developing to mitigate the pandemic? And among the solutions, there is a contact tracing application. And why is this method of contact tracing relevant? Can you tell us more about the functionalities of this application? Because we hear a lot of controversy about contact tracing, yet it is a method that has been used manually by doctors for several years. So can you tell us more about this? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually prepared a few slides that I would like to share. I'll try to share my screen right now. Oh,
yes, go ahead.
Actually, host disabled participant screen sharing. I I'm not able to share my slides, I guess.
Let's see, if someone from the technical team can provide some help.
That's okay. I guess I can talk without slides. Although, yeah, if it's easy to fix, then we could do that. But otherwise,
if you want to start, Irina, and we'll make sure that you can share the slides in just a few seconds. But feel free to start.
Okay, so I could just start. Basically, I just kind of wanted to give a brief overview of several projects at Mila and collaborators of Mila. And the projects actually ranged, well, some of them were already discussed. They range from omics data analysis, such as proteomics and genomics, to simulations allowing to test repurposing different drugs or developing new drugs, again, in simulations. And as you mentioned, the contact tracing and risk estimation app. So that's kind of one of the largest projects right now at Mila, which involves not just students and professors at Mila and is led by Yoshua Benjo, but also several companies in Montreal and globally as well, including even Europe. So let me see if I can share my screen. No, I still cannot share my screen, but that's okay. I guess, yeah, I can send the slides later if anyone is interested, and I can simply just talk through that. But the idea, okay, so I'll just talk about apps then. So basically the idea was that, of course, we all keep hearing and reading about various tracing apps. And there's Singapore app, and there's Israeli app, and apps in China and so on. But there are several problems with existing solutions. Well, first of all, simply tracing without making kind of more data-driven inferences that machine learning would allow you to do might not be sufficiently accurate. And the second problem is that most of those apps are not particularly focused on privacy, to put it mildly. So if you have a centralized solution where all the data from people are collected in one place and essentially you know people's social network, so government has all your private data. That's why people are very reluctant and kind of often discuss that they are not too keen on such apps. So if you would like people to use an app, you really have to completely focus on privacy and security of their data. But on the other hand, it's not just concerns about government having the data from people, but it's also a concern about other people potentially having access to your data. For example, if you walk on the street and your screen lights up showing the increased risk of infection from the person across the street, you don't want that person kind of to feel like, I don't know, the one who nobody wants to come close to, even though maybe it would be good for in terms of context. Sorry?
You can share your screen. It's okay for now.
Okay, okay. Basically, I was trying to say that there are two types of extremes, and vigilante attacks, for example, when people know that other people are infected and know where they live and all kind of private information, we don't want that either. So you're trying to basically come up with an app that is more than other apps is focused on privacy. And that's a kind of solution we are working on right now at Mila with our collaborators in the companies. And let me just now share the screen then. And I can maybe show you a few examples. Okay, here we go. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's okay, thank you.
Okay, but you perhaps see also there. Okay, you don't want to see the zoom, I guess, and I cannot get rid of it. Oh, maybe that's better. Okay, anyway, so as I mentioned, I kind of just wanted to very briefly highlight that there are multiple projects ranging from, as I mentioned, genomics, simulations, to the app, to the dialogue applications, which actually going to do question answering so people can stay informed, and so on and so forth, and imaging applications. There is, Mila is actually part of the AI Against COVID Canada initiative, which involves not just Mila, but also Vector Institute in Toronto, and EMI, and the CIFAR. And we have a page, if you're interested, you can take a look. At Mila webpage, you'll have description of various projects that are underway at Mila, from the peer-to-peer app that I started talking about, to the drug development and multi-omic profiling, viral evolution studies, joint project with University of Montreal and several hospitals here, as well as with my colleagues in mass department, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned, there is a deep reinforcement learning approaches to discovering novel drugs, and there are many projects on the webpage. So I kind of just wanted to take one step back, and before we talk about the app, I just also wanted to mention that there are 2 time scales here. On one time scale, of course, ultimate goal, we're trying to develop vaccines, you're trying to develop antiviral drugs, but that takes long time. And those are kind of big questions you try to figure out how to better understand the progression of pandemics, how to better understand which variables are involved in the individual disease progression, how can you affect those variables, things like that. For that, you need to collect the data. And there are multiple initiatives underway, and one of them actually is led by Canada Excellence Research Chair in Genomics, Vincent Moser at McGill, and it's called BQC, Biobank Quebec, COVID-19. So this is a large initiative which is trying to collect the data from 9 hospitals across Quebec, and they're recruiting patients, and they're basically collecting both sequencing data from the viral genome and from host genome from patients, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, we really hope to be able to analyze this data, and based on this analysis, have better mechanistic understanding of the disease progression, better understanding of what kind of drugs, existing drugs can be repurposed, or the new drugs can be developed, and so on and so forth. But this is, as I mentioned, a long-term goal, and it hinges on the data availability. The shorter-term goal is to get ourselves out of the lockdown without facing second wave of the epidemic. And as Joshua put it in his blog when proposing this tracing and risk estimation app, social distancing works, but in its most trivial, simplest form is brutal and obviously economically extremely damaging. Don't need to even talk about that. So we would like to have something that we would call smart social distancing. So you only social distance when you have to, and you keep up-to-date risk estimates of people being infected. And if those risk estimates are high, a person may be have to get tested and definitely stay at home. But if the risk estimates are low, the person can go to work and have social gatherings within like at least somewhat small circle of family and friends. So that's the idea, to kind of find this delicate trade-off between not completely ruining economy and not facing second outbreak. So back to the app, why contact tracing? Well, because as I said, smart social distancing really depends on knowing the level of risk for particular individual, and also being quite accurate in estimating this risk. Why automated tracing? Well, on the next page, I kind of outline pros and cons of manual versus digital. Manual contact tracing, it's what traditionally been done, but this basically depends on interviews and phone calls. It's totally not scalable in the outbreak of this size. It does not really, it's not up to date. You cannot update the information like on daily basis, and it's very slow, it's tedious interviewing process. And digital contact tracing is obviously much faster, hopefully much more accurate, scalable, but as I mentioned before, privacy is a serious issue, and you really need to focus on that issue if you would like this app to be deployed and used by many people. And back to the questions. Well, why do we need AI? Well, because simplest contact tracing apps, which do not use any inference from data, they are only able to record when a person was tested positive, for example, and share this information with people the person met. But there are many other variables that may be indicative of the person developing disease. There are more subtle symptoms even before the person gets tested. For example, if the person is totally asymptomatic, but multiple people who met this person developed symptoms, it kind of indicates that maybe this person is a culprit. So you do need probabilistic inference to come up with such conclusions by gathering bits and pieces of information and doing what in other fields is called sensor fusion. And also, instead of just saying that person is infected or not, ideally you would like to have more realistic picture of different levels of contagiousness of the person. Again, data-driven approaches can be utilized to have such more accurate and more flexible kind of risk estimation. And as I already mentioned, the focus here is on delicate trade-off between accuracy and privacy. You don't want everything to be on centralized server. You don't want all the details of personal contacts to be available to government. You also don't want naive peer-to-peer communication where the risk estimates are directly propagated to other people, because we all know about vigilante attacks. So that's what we're trying to keep in mind. And I probably don't have too much time to talk about details, but the idea is that you will be maintaining probabilistic models that allow you to compute your risk estimate on each cell phone, and you will be communicating through a server, but you will be using very, very strict privacy enforcing protocol so that the constraints I mentioned before are satisfied. And there are various other aspects that can be quite useful if you utilize AI risk predictors and models like that. Without going into all details, I just want to say that what we're doing right now, we're also training a simulator, very detailed simulator based on the state of art in the epidemiology on how disease spreads, and particularly with COVID-19. And hopefully, after we both kind of make this simulator more and more fine-tuned to the data and use it for the inferences with real data, we can, at the end of the day, not only have tracing and risk estimation app for people, but we can also provide government with a better epidemiological simulator and model that can help make decisions regarding policies and so on. So basically you have a very realistic tool for testing different policies. So I'm running out of time. So I guess I should better take some questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Irina, for your complete presentation of what Mila is currently working on to fight the pandemic. So beyond the technical aspects, these applications raise many ethical issues. So it brings us to the second part of the conference, devoted to the ethical issues raised by contact tracing applications. So Sasha, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, Irina, for this introduction and smooth transition to the ethical challenges raised by one of the most controversial, but maybe also useful AI application, which is contact tracing. And I also appreciate, you formulating cautiously the trade-off. As you say, we have to be careful between how do we make sure we have something which is ethical, which is privacy preserving, while at the same time, which prevents, some of the economic consequences of the sanitary crisis. And I think you're right in your slide to word it as privacy versus accuracy, and not privacy versus civil liberties or public health, as we have heard many times in the current debates, because it's a false dichotomy in the end. We can really have both. It's all about how nuanced it is. So we will come back to the questions to your presentation by the end of the whole panelists, but many thanks for that. And so now moving on to the ethical challenges raised by contact tracing application. And my first question for the co-founder and president of the Future Society, Nicolas Miailly. So we have seen and we have heard in the current debate of many of the different challenges being raised by contact tracing applications, ranging from data privacy, of course, but also from stigmatization of certain, for example, social workers, also potential discrimination, and also the risk, of course, of mass surveillance. You have recently published an op-ed on the ethical safeguards for contact tracing apps. Can you tell us more about what are for you the main ethical risk of this application? We cannot hear you, Nicolas, unfortunately.
I believe way more in the power of AI to do micro modeling over how various factors help better understand the R0 and the evolution of the R0. We need, if we are to be very smart over how we fight against that pandemics, we need to be able to model and project according to various factors in their evolution how R0 evolves, including according to the rate of adoption of a or multiple contact tracing apps. And I think that AI being, you know, big data driven, machine learning centric AI systems being probabilistic can really help us model the evolution of the R0 according to very different factors. And old epidemiological models did not factor this kind of new technological resources, including contact tracing apps. So that's the first point. Now, I think that we can all agree that we tend to look at the misuse of technologies, and at times we fail to understand that they can be misused. What has been called as herd immunity, which is, you know, in a way, the natural evolution of our species in the fight against the virus, acquiring, in other words, herd immunity would probably cost hundreds of millions of lives today and trillions of US dollars in economic output. So if we are to flatten the curve, as we need to do, up until a vaccine is approved and only approved and scaled up across markets in the global north and in the global south, if the real objective is to flatten the curve while we are waiting for the vaccine, I think that we can all agree that we cannot remain without doing anything, but cross-armed. We really need to try and see what technology can bring to us. And indeed, AI can bring a lot to us. Well, it's clear that ethics is always context-specific and relates to local values. Not all of the values that you have together are universal. Some of them are universal, but many of them, especially when they're in tension across each other, between accuracy and privacy, between access and privacy, between fair treatment and privacy. Not all of them are universal, and some of them are very much local. So the risk and the appetite for risk and the way this risk will be adjudicated over depends on where these solutions are implemented. And it so happens that on the one hand, you've got, you know, municipal cultures, national cultures, regional cultures, and on the other hand, you've got technological giants. You've all seen the alliance between Apple and Google over the decision to launch an API using a decentralized approach, and we can discuss how credible is the claim of decentralization that they make when they are so centralized in their services. When these two companies are proposing a solution to the world, they are proposing this solution from a worldview, which is not that of Africa, the Middle East, but it's very much that of a small corner of the world in the Silicon Valley, which has a view on the world. That's important. The third point I'd like to make is that these contact tracing apps, if we don't pay attention, will become a distraction, moving or look away from where it has to be. We need to stay focused and keep our eyes on the ball. Tech solutionism won't work. There is no silver bullet. And however we use AI, it has to be in a composite approach, plugging AI wherever we can, which is relevant and accurate across the board, from drug discovery to line of care management and so on and so forth. And if we don't do that, if we look at the use of AI solely through the lens of contact tracing app, we are distracting ourselves. An app can be useful only and only if it's part of a wider therapeutic and non-therapeutic strategy. Otherwise, it's a distraction. So long as we think of it as a silver bullet, it cannot work. What I mean by the composite strategy is, as we all know, well, the quest for a vaccine or treatment, okay, but also the other parts which are directly relevant to flattening the curve. This app is there to help flatten the curve. Okay, by breaking down chains of contaminations. Well, there are other very important measures to help break those chains down, namely protective gears, testing, and social distancing. An app can really help move these needles along. And if you look at the cost of developing an app versus the cost of massifying the number of tests to hundreds of thousands every day, you see that the cost lies in the test. And we need to be careful not to let ourselves be distracted over the value of one app, however useful they're going to be, because they are going to be. Another point to make, which is important, is that at this stage, most applications are going according to one similar set of protocols, which revolve around using the Bluetooth module to perform anonymized, or I should be more precise here, pseudonymized contact tracing. Therefore, these contact tracing apps at this stage do not, the core modules, the core protocol, Bluetooth-based, do not use artificial intelligence. It's low technology, it's basic, and it's probably a good thing. Why? If we want the rate of adoption to go high, we want and we need the public to understand what's going on under the hood. The public will not tolerate a black box. The public will decide to get and use the application if it's a white box. And for the public to understand, we need the protocols to be lean, simple. And we know that a lot of AI protocols, particularly machine learning protocols, particularly deep learning protocols, are complex and at times opaque. They have an explainability problem. So we need to be careful to separate things. Again, no silver bullet. Modeling can be very useful, but at the core of app-based contact tracing, the fact that there is no AI so far, in my view, to start with, is a good thing to prove to the public that the claim of trustworthiness can be adhered to, can be respected. Now, the third thing, privacy. We all want to build privacy-protecting contact tracing applications. But it's not sufficient to say privacy-protecting. Privacy against who? Who are we trying to protect individuals against? Governments? Other individuals, including in the household? Or companies, banks, insurance companies, or even the Googles and the Apples of the world? And answering that question, again, is very local. How much do you trust your government? How much do you trust your company? How much do you trust other external actors? According to the answer you give to that question, the final part of the contact tracing protocol can be developed. We have seen a lot of infighting going on, which culminated yesterday with the announcements that Germany would move away from the Pepto Robert protocol that was defined with France, again, Bluetooth-based, on account that the protocol was too centralized. And if you are trying to protect yourself against the government, you would not want the contact tracing app to rely on a central database in the hand of the government. If you want to protect yourself against big corporations, you would not want the protocol to rely or to feed into a central database in the hands of a big corporation. So the saying privacy does not suffice. We need to be more precise as to who are we trying to protect people against. And another point is that an app is only one component of the wireless system. As I said before, an app is based at the core of it on a contact tracing protocol. Let's be simple and simplistic, a contact tracing algorithm, a protocol, a set of instructions. But on top of the set of instructions, there is the application. And on top of the application, there is probably an IT system. So if, like DP3, which is one of the leading purveyor of these privacy-preserving protocols, or Pepto, or even the Google-Apple Alliance, when they claim, don't worry, our protocol is going to be anonymous. By the way, it's not anonymous, it's pseudonymized, meaning that the identifiers that you get are pseudonyms, but they can be re-identified under certain conditions. So if you claim that, don't worry, these identifiers are anonymized. Well, but if indeed they're anonymized, but to use them, you need to log onto an app where you have to put your details and deliver privacy or deliver personal data, then yes, you're in danger. So when you look at the ethically aligned design of such contact tracing solutions, forget about the app, it's a distraction. Contact tracing solutions, we need to look at it from a holistic perspective and plugging together the protocol on top of which there is an app, and also asking who will use the app, who gets access to what. It's very important. Another point I think which is important to make on this is that when we look at contact tracing app or contact tracing services, we are looking, like Irina said, at automating a service that is very labor intensive. Before we got into the pandemic, contact tracing was done manually. And now we're looking at ways in which we can automatize to help healthcare practitioners deal with the inflow of contact tracing requirements. But in how we're doing it, again, there's a tension between bypassing the healthcare providers through fully anonymous contact tracing that indeed relieves the burden away from them, but that does not help them see what's going on. If everything is anonymous, we're not helping them. We're helping society as a whole, which is very much needed, deal with the problem, but they are blind. We also need to look at a solution that helps them see through contact, and therefore we need to see how some of that data under some condition, including of course voluntary choice, can be re-anonymized. So there is a tension here between supporting but bypassing healthcare providers and supporting and enhancing, empowering healthcare providers. But healthcare providers usually are national, meaning it's the state, so they are also potentially the enemy, trying to do surveillance on you, or they are private, insurance companies. And so potentially they're also the problem. That's why this four quadrant is very important. So that's why it's important to keep around the balls and not only claiming that we want to do ethically aligned by design or ethically aligned operations. We need to be very precise as to what that means. But if I had to summarize those criteria into a few words, I'd say that we need, number one, to have clear and transparent governance rules. The how on this is almost as important, if not more, than the what. How you do the what that you do is more important than the what. And so we need to have clear and transparent rules over who does what on what. Second, the design has to empower citizens. Like Irina said, it's about making the system smarter. How can we empower citizens to bring smartness into the system, including creating connections with healthcare providers? It's not sufficiently good to have system contact tracing solutions bypass healthcare provider. How do we connect them better? Third, obviously, the system should be based on should be voluntary, reversible, and temporary to deal with the crisis. Otherwise, the risk of what we call a function creep, where we would all end up in a big Orwellian surveillance state, is real. The function creep is a big danger. So it has to be reversible and voluntary and temporary. Third, as I said, it has to be based on an advanced form of pseudonymizations. What should flow around, either peer-to-peer or centralized, is a pretty solidly designed and operated set of pseudonymization. Also, very important that the code is open and open source to allow for auditing. When we see Facebook and Google overcoming the huge competition standpoint to co-develop an API, I say yes, thank you very much. But my answer, my question is, how auditable is your protocol? Please put it out there for everyone, and including the public. The public does not understand the logic of open source. The public will not understand that organically a community of developers are going to audit that. We need a clear, and it would be great if international organizations, including United Nations, the Office of the Secretary General, could appoint a group of panel of international experts to audit Google and Apple on those claims, to serve as an intermediary between the public and the organic community of developers. Penultimate criteria, these contact tracing solutions, which have to be ethically designed and operated, have to be ethically aligned, designed and operated following a whole of society dialogue. It's very important to involve a wide set of stakeholders. That's what we do at the AI Civic Forum. The AI Civic Forum that we are leading with our friends from Algora Lab, from Mila, with UNESCO, and we're very happy to start a collaboration with Iceesco, is designed to bring together these stakeholders into a framework to help make those decisions over these big questions. And I'll stop there. Sorry, I'll be a bit long, but I think it's an important question that you're raising.
Thank you very much, Nico. I see also a lot of reaction in the chat according to what are the ethical risks.
At least I can hear you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sasha.
Okay, perfect. Now, I was thanking you, Nico, for this very interesting, overall perspective on both what are the assumptions that we need to deconstruct about contact tracing app, being careful of tech solutionism, that this is not a magical app which is going to resolve everything, that this has to be built within a broader sanitary strategy, and that in the end, if ever you do spot people exposed to the virus, but you're not able to put them in quarantine, you're not able to test them, this is not going to solve anything. And also highlighting some of the main ethical risk. I think there is also some reaction in the chat according to the R0, and so which is the transmission rates, and how of course this varies according to cultural habits, to sanitary measures. But there's been also, as a last question to you, Nico, a lot of discussion among what is the adoption rate necessary for those contact tracing applications. There's been a lot of controversy among the epidemiologists on that. Some have spoken about 60%, some others 70, 80%, some others like much lower, 30%. So even though there's no consensus on this figure yet, most of the experts agree that we need a high adoption rate by population, which can only be done with, building trust. So how can we do this? Can we manage to build trust with a clear ethical and policy framework? And the second, which is a bit more complicated question, is do you think there's any scenarios where it would be possible to make the app mandatory?
Well, it would be tempting to make the app, okay. So we hear a lot that the rate of adoption that would be needed for a given R0 between 2 and 3, which is where we are now, where we're at the beginning of the flattening the curve move, being efficient with a contact tracing solutions at that R0 would require 60% or 50% of the population to adopt that, which, let's be clear, cannot be achieved if you don't make the app mandatory. That's the first point. Then the second point of clicking into a dangerous slippery slope is the following. Then if it's 60% and your app is privacy preserving, it's pseudonymized, let's make it mandatory. Well, I think it's a very dangerous way of approaching things. That's precisely the kind of dangerous slippery slope we should avoid. And that's what I said before. And contact tracing solution, again, forget about the app. The app is a gadget. The app is a distraction so long as it does not plug into a wireless system. I'm more interested in the case of, let's say, France, in the case of Morocco, in the case of Saudi Arabia, in the case of Nigeria, at the number of contact tracers that this app is going to empower. Korea is said to have 20,000 people working on the ground to do contact tracing. It's about helping them create a trusted environment with people, more than it is about building a system that will bypass them. So that's on the first question with the rate of adoption. So yes, it's possible to build trust, but so long as we look at trust in the right way, so long as it operates on its own, the app is a gadget. And I use these provocative words but I just want to put a wake-up call out there. Now, I want to close where I started by going exactly where Elena was saying. I think that one of the biggest services that AI can render to the fight against pandemic is helping us model and plan in almost real time the evolution of the R0 according to various measures, including an app with 20% rate adoption, an app with 15, an app with 35, an app with 65, and obviously with other sanitary measures, because as you very rightly said, Sasha, the R0 is very local. It's related to a very specific context with many things coming into the picture. And many feedback loops. So I'm more interested in leveraging AI to better understand, plan, and model these feedback loops, as opposed to focusing in my language, sorry for that, foolishly on one thing, the contact tracing, as if it was God.
Many thanks, Nicolas. I think we could go on for a lot more on how to deconstruct all of those methods, and I see that Irina also seems to be nodding and may want to add some things in the last part of the conference Q&A. But without further ado, I think it's also important to remind ourselves that beyond AI, beyond digital contact tracing apps, beyond the pandemic, we're also living a period where a lot of us are slowing down. A lot of us, are locked down home, have had an impact, whether it is in our immediate circle, in our daily routine. And so we also push, to reconsider things differently. And more, we're also hearing about what is the new world, which is going to happen once we get out of the pandemic. And I would like to leave Pauline Noiseau introduce the last part of this conference on what are the philosophical considerations we can retain.
Thank you very much, Sasha. So I will just switch in French to Marc-Antoine. On va passer directement à la dernière partie, sur la partie des questions philosophiques pour Marc-Antoine. Finalement, on ne posera pas les questions éthiques. Je pensais que Marc-Antoine allait aussi intervenir dans la deuxième partie, mais on va passer directement pour des questions de temps dans la dernière partie sur la perspective philosophique. Marc-Antoine, tu es professeur de philosophie à l'Université de Montréal, professeur également associé à MILA, l'Institut québécois d'intelligence artificielle. Ma première question va être le rôle du philosophe dans la crise actuelle. On sait que le rôle du philosophe, c'est dans un premier temps de pointer les dysfonctionnements, en tout cas les tares ou les problèmes qui pourraient intervenir dans une société ou dans un climat particulier ou dans un environnement. Mais dans un deuxième moment, le rôle du philosophe, c'est aussi de proposer positivement des nouveaux modèles et de nouveaux paradigmes d'être et de faire. Et donc, au-delà du solutionnisme technologique, selon toi, qu'est-ce qui pourrait être fait pour résoudre la solution, mais d'un point de vue humain, d'un point de vue émotionnel, voire d'un point de vue spirituel ou environnemental? Merci.
Merci, bonjour à tout le monde. Hello everyone, salam alaikum. Alors, c'est une question extrêmement difficile que tu me poses, Pauline, parce que évidemment, on aimerait avoir des modèles sous la main, on aimerait avoir des solutions prêtes à l'emprunt. Et ce n'est pas le cas. Alors, il ne faut pas non plus surestimer le rôle du philosophe, mais c'est vrai que la philosophie, comme d'autres disciplines au temps long, nous donne un petit peu de recul pour essayer de comprendre ce qui se passe. D'abord, je voudrais revenir sur le terme de crise. On ne trouvera pas de solution miracle à cette crise. Nicolas l'a dit, solve this crisis, mais je dirais de manière plus générale, il n'y a pas de solution à une crise. On peut trouver des moyens de la traverser, mais on ne peut pas trouver de solution à une crise. Une crise, c'est un phénomène qui est complexe, qui est déclenché par un grand nombre de facteurs qui affectent plusieurs aspects de notre vie psychologique et de notre existence sociale. Alors, il n'existe pas de crise avec une cause unique et un effet unique. La crise actuelle, par exemple, elle n'est pas seulement liée à la pandémie, mais elle est déclenchée par cette pandémie. Et on sent bien que ce qui se passe aujourd'hui est beaucoup plus profond que ce qui se joue avec la pandémie et avec la situation sanitaire. C'est la raison pour laquelle, même si on trouve une solution sanitaire, et je ne parle pas ici seulement de l'application de tracing contacts, mais même si on trouve une solution sanitaire à la pandémie, ça ne permettra pas de résoudre la crise actuelle. Alors, d'abord, je voudrais rappeler que ce n'est pas la première pandémie que nous connaissons, que ce n'est pas non plus la plus grave que nous ayons connue. Hein, je rappelle, tout le monde le sait, que la grippe espagnole a tué entre 20 à 50 millions de personnes en Europe, et que nous survivrons à cette pandémie et que nous en connaîtrons d'autres. Mais si ce n'est pas la crise la plus grave que nous traversons, pourquoi elle suscite, cette pandémie, une réaction inédite, unique dans l'histoire de l'humanité? Je crois d'abord qu'elle est le signe d'un changement moral à l'échelle de la planète, à l'échelle planétaire, à l'échelle de l'humanité. Nous ne sommes plus prêts à accepter des millions de morts pour une pandémie qui peut être limitée par des changements de comportement ou des changements de l'organisation sociale. Alors, ça ne sera peut-être pas vrai demain, ça ne sera peut-être pas vrai sur le long terme, ce que je dis maintenant, mais c'est vrai de notre histoire récente et c'est vrai d'aujourd'hui. Notre histoire récente nous montre, comme le rappelle Steven Pinker dans un livre qui a été un best-seller, Better Angels of Our Nature, eh bien, comme le montre Steven Pinker, nous sommes moralisés à travers les âges et nous n'acceptons plus de sacrifier des millions de personnes. Et je crois que ça, c'est véritablement un changement moral qui se joue aujourd'hui avec cette crise. Et c'est d'autant plus important que malgré la diversité des cultures, eh bien, cela traverse toutes nos communautés dans le monde, de l'ouest à l'est, du sud au nord. Nous sommes tous embarqués sur le même bateau et nous sentons bien que nous ne pouvons pas considérer la vie humaine comme nous l'avons fait par le passé parfois. Je dirais que c'est aussi en raison de ce changement moral qui est extrêmement visible aujourd'hui, qui n'a pas commencé il y a 3 mois, qui a commencé bien avant. C'est en raison de ce changement moral que la pandémie actuelle rend insupportable les failles de notre organisation sociale. Que ce soit à l'échelle nationale, dans chaque pays, on se pose des questions sur la manière dont nous vivons collectivement, ou à l'échelle internationale. Alors, c'est trivial de le rappeler, mais tout d'abord, les injustices sociales
Marc-Antoine, on t'entend très mal. Il y a, je pense, un problème de réseau.
Sociales ont des conséquences négatives déjà vulnérables, seuls, malades ou appartenant déjà à des communautés. Allô?
Oui, on t'entend, mais c'est simplement coupé. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a un petit problème de son.
D'accord. Alors, je suis désolé, c'est
Là, on t'entend
la
mieux, mais
connexion.
on n'a pas
Ok.
entendu les 10 dernières secondes.
D'accord. Je vais peut-être arrêter la vidéo si ça se reproduit. Donc, je disais simplement que le confinement, le lockdown a rendu visible, si on veut, des choses qu'on connaissait, mais peut-être rendu plus visible, plus clair, un certain nombre de discriminations sociales qui ont des conséquences extrêmement négatives sur des personnes qui sont déjà vulnérables, pauvres, seules, des personnes qui appartiennent à des communautés discriminées, qui sont malades, etc. Évidemment, ça a montré la vulnérabilité au cours des âges, la vulnérabilité des différentes générations. Les personnes les plus âgées, ça paraît évident, mais en réalité, la vulnérabilité aussi des plus jeunes, parce que cette pandémie, même si elle tue beaucoup moins jeunes, a provoqué une réaction sociale qui a discriminé d'une certaine manière les plus jeunes, leur jeunesse, leur enfance, avec la privation parfois d'une éducation, les écoles fermées, les écoles massivement fermées. Et donc, on sent une vulnérabilité globale et une vulnérabilité qui se traduit dans des injustices sociales tout à fait criantes. Alors, ça montre aussi, c'est un point plus politique, la pandémie montre aussi à celles et à ceux qui, pendant des décennies, ont milité pour qu'il y ait moins d'État. Elle a montré que l'État-providence, l'État qui redistribue les richesses, eh bien, ça permet de protéger chacun d'entre nous et ça promeut les intérêts de tous, ça défend les intérêts de tous. Et enfin, je dirais que dans un monde interconnecté, comme notre monde avec Internet et avec les transports internationaux, eh bien, nous avons besoin de consolider notre vie locale. Nous avons besoin de repenser les réseaux locaux, les réseaux humains, les réseaux sociaux locaux, mais aussi les réseaux économiques et les réseaux politiques. Il n'y a de bonne mondialisation, on ne reviendra pas sur la mondialisation, mais il n'y a de bonne mondialisation que lorsqu'elle s'appuie sur une organisation sociale locale forte. Voilà, disons, quelques éléments pour comprendre ce qui se joue avec cette crise, à la fois du point de vue moral, du point de vue psychologique et social. Et face à la crise, eh bien, il n'y a pas véritablement de solution. J'ai dit pas de solution unique, mais pas véritablement de solution. Il s'agit de penser la transition. Penser la transition pour précisément que ce type de crise ne se représente pas de cette manière-là. Il y en aura d'autres dans l'histoire de l'humanité. De ce point de vue-là, rien de nouveau sous le soleil. Mais que ce type de crise, qu'un lockdown, un confinement qui enferme à peu près la moitié de l'humanité, que ce genre de choses ne se reproduisent pas. Et pour que ça ne se reproduise pas, eh bien, il ne s'agit pas de simplement répondre à la pandémie, il ne s'agit pas de répondre simplement à cette maladie en particulier, mais c'est de repenser toute notre organisation sociale et donc de penser la transition vers une autre forme de société. De modèle pré-emploi, mais ça fait déjà des décennies qu'on y réfléchit. Et je dis bien des décennies, pas simplement quelques années. Il faut reprendre tout ce qui a été écrit dans les années 60-70, au moment où le système de croissance a commencé à s'imposer sur toute la surface de la planète après la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Et il y a eu une résistance très forte. Alors, ces résistances très fortes ont été masquées par un antagonisme entre d'un côté l'Ouest et l'Empire soviétique de l'autre, et puis une troisième voie qui a essayé de se dégager avec les pays non alignés, avec les pays qui souhaitaient avoir plus d'indépendance à l'égard notamment de ces pays du Nord, à l'Ouest comme à l'Est. Bon, eh bien, la littérature de cette époque nous donne encore des choses à penser sur peut-être repenser la solidarité, repenser la sociabilité, repenser nos désirs, repenser nos rêves, repenser notre mobilité. Puis, j'aimerais justement peut-être en venir à ces éléments-là. Vous me permettrez de rappeler, c'est le mois de Ramadan, il y a un très beau mot en arabe qui a une grande signification en islam, qui est dhikr. Dhikr, c'est le rappel. Alors, je laisse la connotation théologique de côté, mais le rappel, c'est important pour justement revenir aux choses essentielles. Et le lockdown, le confinement que l'on connaît avec cette pandémie, c'est un rappel des choses essentielles. Quelles sont ces choses essentielles? S'occuper de soi, s'occuper de nos proches et rencontrer l'autre, rencontrer l'altérité, se mettre en contact avec les autres pour créer une forme de solidarité. Par exemple, des amis étaient en quarantaine après un voyage et il faut leur amener à manger. Eh bien, on redécouvre à ce moment-là, pendant ce mois de Ramadan, c'est finalement le message même du mois de Ramadan, à savoir prendre le temps de méditer, d'être une meilleure personne, protéger les pauvres qui sont durement touchés, protéger les vulnérables et partager la joie avec les autres. Eh bien, la pandémie nous rappelle ces choses simples, ces choses essentielles qui donnent du sens à nos vies. Le lockdown, qui a enfermé plus ou moins la moitié de la planète, eh bien, nous a offert quelque chose de très précieux. Il nous a offert du temps pour réfléchir à sa vie personnelle, du temps pour réfléchir à l'organisation de notre société. Et je dirais que ce confinement, eh bien, c'est un éloge à la lenteur, pas à l'arrêt, pas à la fermeture, mais un éloge à la lenteur. Et c'est peut-être la première leçon que nous devrions tirer de cette pandémie. Nous devons ralentir. À force de nous agiter, eh bien, nous avons perdu le sens de l'essentiel. À force d'aller vite, nous avons paradoxalement construit un monde qui est plus lent avec l'arrêt de la vie économique dans tant de pays sur cette planète. Alors, je disais, il y a une littérature des années 60-70 qu'on peut mobiliser encore aujourd'hui. Évidemment, il ne s'agit pas d'appliquer les vieilles recettes, mais je pense justement à des analyses d'un philosophe un peu marginalisé et marginal qui s'appelle Ivan Illich. Et je pense à ces analyses sur la mobilité, sur la vitesse, notamment engendrée par les voitures, par le fait qu'on a transformé notre société et nos routes pour accueillir en masse les voitures. Et Ivan Illich montrait la chose suivante. En augmentant les vitesses et la vitesse du transport individuel dans les villes, et il prenait l'exemple de l'Inde, eh bien nous avons considérablement réduit la vitesse globale de la mobilité. Considérablement réduit la vitesse globale et surtout créé des différences entre ceux qui peuvent aller vite et puis ceux qui sont condamnés à être de toute façon lents. Eh bien, je repense à Ivan Illich en me disant, il s'agit peut-être effectivement de retrouver de la fluidité, de retrouver, non pas de la vitesse, mais retrouver de la fluidité dans une mobilité plus lente. Et ça m'amène justement à la deuxième leçon de cette crise globale. Je pense la plus évidente et celle qui va nous marquer durablement. C'est que nous devons repenser complètement les mobilités internationales. Mobilités internationales, mais aussi les mobilités nationales dans des pays qui sont très vastes. Alors, là, je dois le dire, il faut éviter aussi un écueil qui serait celui de la fermeture des frontières. On voit bien qu'il y a aujourd'hui une tendance à vouloir fermer les frontières. Et je pense en particulier les frontières avec le Sud, qui probablement va nourrir un certain nombre de populismes au Nord, arrêter les mobilités du Sud vers le Nord, fermer nos frontières. Ça, ce serait la pire leçon à tirer de cette crise globale. Mais il faut repenser ces mobilités internationales, notamment quand elles s'avèrent des mobilités non essentielles. Des choses qui sont devenues un luxe, mais un luxe auquel on s'est habitué, qui ne paraissent plus un luxe. Prendre l'avion pour aller en vacances à l'autre bout de la planète. Eh bien, ce luxe-là, je crois qu'il va être temps de le réduire en tout cas, et de partager la mobilité avec ceux pour qui la mobilité n'est pas un luxe, ceux qui sont soumis de quitter des zones qui sont dévastées environnementalement. Et par conséquent, il s'agit ici de repenser la mobilité dans un sens de plus de justice. Pas de fermeture, pas d'arrêt complet de la mobilité internationale, mais repenser une mobilité qui est plus juste, qui est mieux répartie. Sur ce point, j'entends parfois des gens qui disent « Ah oui, il faut arrêter ces migrations ». Si on regarde la manière dont l'épidémie s'est transformée en pandémie et a contaminé le monde, on s'aperçoit qu'effectivement, ça suit les vols long courriers en avion. Mais la pandémie ne fait pas de différence entre le touriste et le migrant économique ou poussé à la migration pour des raisons environnementales. En revanche, nous avons le devoir politique et moral de répartir cette mobilité de façon à privilégier ceux qui en ont le plus besoin. Donc voilà quelques éléments. Évidemment, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de secteurs de notre organisation sociale qui doivent être revus, refonder notre rapport à l'État, refonder la manière dont l'État peut protéger les plus vulnérables, repenser la justice. Et là encore, il ne s'agit pas de réinventer les modèles, ils sont présents, mais je pense qu'il y a une inertie dans notre histoire qui a fait en sorte que ces modèles n'ont pas été mis en application, quand bien même on savait qu'on allait frapper un mur. Eh bien, cette inertie-là, je crois qu'il est temps justement de retrouver une forme de dynamisme et paradoxalement, l'arrêt de l'économie mondiale, l'arrêt des mobilités mondiales pendant un certain temps, eh bien, c'est exactement ce qui va nous redonner ce dynamisme social, cette énergie sociale pour réinventer une société plus juste.
Merci beaucoup Marc-Antoine pour tes réponses. J'aimerais simplement juste revenir sur 2 points, en tout cas que tu as soulevés. Le premier, évidemment, c'est la question des vulnérabilités. En effet, tu as mentionné le fait que la situation actuelle mettait en lumière les vulnérabilités accrues de certaines communautés. Et c'est vrai qu'on force est de constater qu'on pose la question de qui prend soin de qui dans nos sociétés. Et les personnes qui prennent soin aujourd'hui sont des personnes qui sont souvent associées, qui sont soit des femmes, soit des personnes immigrantes. Et donc, évidemment, ça nous invite à nous poser la question de la transition que tu as aussi soulevée et d'un appel à une transition plus sociale, plus juste, qui prend soin des autres et donc évidemment qui ferait appel à une éthique du care, c'est-à-dire à une éthique du soin des autres, tout en faisant appel à la lenteur et à la solidarité. Donc, merci beaucoup. On va passer maintenant à la période de questions-réponses. Sasha, do you want to, have you just chosen some questions?
Yes, absolutely. Many thanks, Marc-Antoine, for this opening, which leaves us, it's going to leave us thinking about, how to slow down, how to make the most out of this period, and how can we really have a disruptive, moment to rethink the whole foundations of our societies. And please, Marc-Antoine, as an AI ethics professor at Université de Montréal, feel free to fill in on the ethical challenges raised by contact tracing apps that we will be tackling in the question session now. So there is first, many thanks to all of the participants. We have over 230 participants, so many thanks everyone for your participation on the chat. We were trying as much as possible with Pauline and the other speakers to have a look, at the chat and select some of the most relevant questions. So I pre-selected with Pauline 4 questions that we'll be happy to share with you in the limited time that is now left. A first question, very brief, but I think which is very important as we focus the second part of the conference on contact tracing app. Many people are confusing tracing and tracking. Maybe someone, Irina or someone else, would like to explain to participants what is the difference between both?
Well, I would say with tracing, it basically allows you to do to pass messages among people, to share information, for example, about their risk of being infected. So you trace your contacts, you trace your encounters, but you don't necessarily track where people go. So for all practical purposes, to update your risk, all you need to know is that you met someone, but you don't need to know exactly where it happened. So to me, again, that's kind of my understanding of that. But basically, if your final goal is update your risk, then all you need to know that encounter happened, and neither you nor any central server really need to have the tracking of your location over time. So this information is indeed more private, and it's not needed to be fully given to me. All I need to know that there was a contact, it happened, and it updates my risk. So if you're careful, of course, you use tracking information or location and time to figure out that contact happened, but you need to do it carefully. I don't know, to me that would be kind of a difference, but I might be wrong.
I would just add one thing, which is, and I agree with you, Irina, one difference that generally, if you were using geo-localized based data, it would be tracking and not tracing. So when we say tracing as opposed to tracking, one of the big things we're saying is that there is no geolocalized data, either GPS-based, which are then anonymized, and we know that anonymizing GPS data without losing the value of high-resolution data is very difficult, almost impossible. That's why pretty quickly Bluetooth became as an interesting bridge to get high-resolution data, relative data, potentially contact, and not geolocalized. But let's say that the boundaries between these two notions are porous. And at least, yeah, I just finished my addition, which is that at least it conveys the idea that the intent is not to localize and therefore not to track, but to trace.
Yeah, although I have to say that, well, say currently we are still relying on GPS while the Bluetooth protocol being finalized and so on. And even if Apple and Google will allow it, as you know, I mean, I'm not an expert in that, but there are many sources of noise in Bluetooth measurements. There are all kind of possible sources of noise, like even when signal goes through the body and so on. So there are false negatives, false positives. So, I mean, nothing is perfect, and perhaps you may need other sensors beside Bluetooth. But for now, geolocation and time information, if it's properly encoded, say it's hashed, you don't really give the exact information when you send it to server. It only is used to determine that a contact happened. And if you're careful about making sure that the information about actual location and time is not recoverable. So for all practical purposes, all you know is that there was a contact and it happened between those two individuals. You don't even know the individuals. You have their IDs, which can be encoded, and this encoding is also changing with time. So it's not like a unique ID assigned to a person, so you can actually identify the person. You also have a protocol where those change kind of on a rotating basis. That's why I was saying that the privacy protocol is quite complicated, because you're really trying to make sure as much as you can that neither your identity nor your location can be really hacked, whether by any centralized authority or by any individual who might get kind of a hold of the data. Like, so if I have my app on my phone and I gather some information and I'm a hacker, I should not be able to figure out that sensitive information about other people. That's why, as I was saying, the protocol we are developing now for this app is quite complicated. It's actually quite limiting in terms of machine learning and inference. That's why you have to be like really sneaky in terms of how to make accurate inference with all the constraints imposed on us by privacy people. But it's worth it.
Pauline, you're...
Yeah,
Hello?
thank you. Thank you very much, Irina. So we have a second question. How can contact tracing apps be inclusive while half the world and population do not have internet access, and many do not have smartphones and even belong to the vulnerable groups of the populations? How to offer global solutions while taking into consideration local considerations? Maybe it's a question for Marc-Antoine or Nicolas. So please respond if you want to.
And let Marc.
Well, just a quick answer. So you're right. Half of the global population don't have access to the internet. And as Nico said it, well, you know, it's not the silver bullets. It's just one. I wouldn't say it's a gadget, but I know it was just a provocative way to trigger an essential debate. But it's not a gadget, but it's just one item in the toolbox to combat effectively the pandemic. So, of course, you know, not all the people around the globe will have access to a contact tracing app, and even in you know, even in Canada, we have inequalities regarding the access to internet, to cell phones, to smartphones, etc. However, the tracing contact app can help us adopt the right behavior and contain, you know, the pandemic. So we shouldn't see it, but we should look at the global benefit yielded.
We can't hear you, Marc-Antoine. It cuts a lot.
Maybe cut the camera, unfortunately. Lost in translation. Maybe Nico, do you wanna? Oh, Marc-Antoine is back.
Maybe Marc-Antoine
I'm sorry,
is better if your
I'm
video
sorry, I
off.
have a very, very bad connection.
Do you want to add something, Nico?
Yeah, well, first of all, indeed, I mentioned the app as a gadget, as a provocation, and apologies if, because I have a lot of respect for the work being done by a lot of people who are also involved in some of the efforts to develop contact tracing. I'm just saying that so long as it's seen as a narrow silver bullet thing, it's what we call in sociology an artifact. And I don't want this to become an artifact and therefore distraction. Now, that's why what I'm trying to push here is a shift from contact tracing app as a focus to contact tracing solutions. In the global south, where the rate of adoption of smartphones is much less than in the global north, the point that I mentioned before, where we see how we can empower healthcare systems and manual contact tracing with automatic process that create trust is really what is needed. In the global south, the disintermediation, the dream of disintermediation proposed by Google and Apple with their API will probably not be possible. It's all about capacity building, capability building, and not capability bypassing. So I'm more interested in the core of capacity building, using digital to equip, pour outiller, comme on dit en français, to equip those healthcare practitioners with the right tools, skills, and capacities to deal with the whole overwhelming flow of contact tracing that they will need to do. So let's stop focusing on only contact tracing app and focus on a contact tracing ecosystem and set of solutions, including the app.
Irina, you are mute. Thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add one more point. Yes, we probably never will be able to equip everyone on the planet with cell phones and install app on all those. And actually, I don't even think that making it mandatory is necessarily a good idea. But even if relatively small percentage of population actually adopts the app and will be using it, it's already like, even like in Singapore, it was what, 10%, even like 20%. But even that is, first of all, better than nothing. Second, it allows you to collect actually huge amounts of data based on which you can make much better, much more accurate epidemiological models. And you can use those models to test various types of policies. So even that is useful. Though, I mean, it could be even like less than 50% of population. So that's why I'm saying, like, we do what we can with the data we gather, and it's already going to be a lot of data.
Thank you, Irina. And just in consideration of time, I think we can only allow for 2 last questions. One of it is one which was just raised on the chat. I'll say in French because it was written in French. Comment peut-on expliquer le fait que les stratégies des pays les moins pourvus des moyens d'intelligence artificielle, comme le Vietnam, la Tunisie, la Jordanie et d'autres pays de la région MENA, s'avèrent jusqu'ici plus efficaces que les stratégies adoptées par des pays connus par leur avancée en matière de capacité et équipement d'IA? If someone wants to take the lead to answer this, it's a hard one.
It's a beautiful one. So we add one stone to the block is, let's not be also, I would say, distracted by the big fragmentation over rules for accounting. There is no global standard for accounting the number of diagnosed, treated, and dead people. A lot of COVID-19 victims are victims of comorbidities, meaning multiple pathologies. So I think that we need to be careful when you make those claims. That's very important. But indeed, I think that when we look at even the number of, so if we look at the number of tests, okay, I think that indeed many countries who are not G7 or G20 are ahead, way ahead of G7 and G20 countries in terms of the number of tests performed every day.
Thank you, Nico. Is there anyone else, any of the other speakers who would like to add a last note on that? No? Okay, well, I think it was already a very, very complete conference. So there's maybe one last question that we will raise, but I would leave the floor to UNESCO, to Eisesco Director General but just mentioning this last question, so we can keep mind of it while precisely giving those concluding remarks, is how can international organizations such as Eisesco develop an awareness campaign strategy to bring awareness among the public, taking into account those topics that we mentioned during today's conference, the human rights and the ethical issues raised by very sensitive health digital applications. So it's about the relevance of international organizations such as Eisesco to build trust among its member states. So to keep in mind that, I don't know if anyone wants to take this one specific question, and if not, then I will leave the floor to Eisesco Director General.
Well, just a word before handing over. So one key element to adopt those AI technologies and this kind of app is public trust. Nico, you already discussed that, but public trust is not something we have under control. It depends on many factors, but we still have some leeway to foster trust in AI. And as you mentioned it, Sasha, education and raising public awareness is one way to foster trust. And I just wanted to mention that at Mila, we work with many civil society organizations, but also with the governments of Canada and Quebec. And we try to support education and transparency about the use of AI. And for instance, that's why Mila will release the code of the application and make it accessible to all. It will be in open access. But I wanted also to mention the work we're currently doing with TFS, the Future Society, and other international organizations, and in particular UNESCO. You mentioned it specifically for this contact tracing application, and more generally on the AI Civic Forum, to raise public awareness on the global stage, but also to help adopt standard setting instruments. And we are very, very happy also to collaborate with Eisesco. So it's a global ecosystem, and well, we now realize that we don't need to travel to work together from one corner of the world to another. So I just wanted to add this. A positive note, ending on a positive note.
Many thanks for the positive notes and opening, Marc-Antoine. And so if there's no further remarks to be done by the panelists, I will be happy to leave the concluding remarks to Dr. Salim Al-Malik, General Director of Eisesco.
Thank you very much. I attended all the speeches that are given by our outstanding speakers. And I think that many of the audience have really benefited quite a lot. We at the Eisesco will consider this as a starting point for more to come. Your collaboration is very important to us, particularly at a time where we are establishing our AI center, which is going to be one of the most important centers that we will do our best to make it really of major help to our member state countries and to others. So with regard to the question that was raised, what can, whether international organization can help or no, I can assure you that most of the international organizations now are working very tremendously on and dealing with AI as one of the most important elements within their framework, and particularly Eisisco work, taking this AI as their number one. And in fact, I think it's going to be very much of importance, particularly within the year to come. So what is going to come after COVID-19 is things are going to be changing, and we all are expecting a major change. The world is not going to be the same after COVID-19, and things are going to be more focused towards AI and technologies. Ethics are very important in these issues, and I think it is very important to have ethical values being presented wherever we go, whether with AI or any other innovation. At last, I really would like to thank Irina for coordinating for the speech, and Mr. Cyrus Houdis, Mark, Anthony Delac, and Nicholas, and also Imad, Mustafa, Pauline, and Sasha for all their contribution in this very important forum, which in my opinion, quite well attended. Particularly those who attended are those who are really very much interested in knowing what AI could do and have done with COVID-19, and the challenges and the opportunities that has been raised during this. This will not be our last forum. I think we are planning to have a setup of series of forum. I hope that our speaker will be of help, will join us in our future forums, and we would welcome any suggestions from our speakers, from our audience. And with this, I would like to say thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you. Merci. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.